Okay, so welcome to everybody to this first update for the Contextualising Hume excavations at Hume Castle. We've been on site now. Well, we started excavating, when was it now? Last Monday, a week ago. We've not been out on site every day, but we were out over the weekend. We're trying to maximise as much interaction with members of the public as we can, whilst maintaining the sort of lockdown restrictions and not contravening any of that. So it's been quite good, actually. We've had a lot of locals and visitors to the site popping up and saying hello, and well, some people just baffled as to why we're out there in the weather. Several people asking why we're not doing it in the summer, but but it's been good. There's been some good interactions. But in terms of what we're doing and what we're looking at, I'll share a few images. Now, some of you already know this information already from details that I've shared with you previously. But for those who aren't aware of where we're digging and why we're digging, we have scheduled monument consent and permission from Historic Environment Scotland to investigate two buildings specifically, and to open up some smaller trenches and test pits in the surrounding landscape to sort of investigate the geology of the site surrounding the castle. In terms of the two main, so we've got two main trenches and then three smaller trenches or test pits. Now, in terms of the two trenches, we're looking at what we believe to be two quite different types of buildings. One potentially is a domestic structure, possibly a house dating to the medieval village that used to surround the castle, and one that we believe is potentially more a sort of administrative building, possibly a gatehouse or similar, leading up to the castle, or what would have been the original routeway. So here you should be able to see this image, which indicates where we're locating our trenches. So the area that you can see highlighted in red, that's the scheduled monument. That's all of the land that is scheduled surrounding the castle. The Hume Castle Preservation Trust own the majority of what is in red, apart from this small sort of rectangular area down here. You can see as well within that lots of little black rectangles and lines. These are the remains of buildings and structures and banks and the like that have been identified previously by Historic Environment Scotland in a drone survey that they completed a few years ago. And we've used this to sort of identify the best places to locate some of our trenches. So the two trenches, trench one up here, which you can see zoomed in a bit more detail down here, and trench two up on the north side of the castle up here, which is zoomed in a bit more detail down here. Now, what we're looking at trench one is on this main image of the landscape. This area here, you can see, I think, between these two outcrops, there's actually quite a nice holloway or trackway that leads uphill, upslope towards the southwest corner of the castle. And then there's two really nice platforms on either side of that slope with what look like structural remains on them. And the working hypothesis is that this was possibly the routeway leading up to the castle, and that you had these buildings on either side of it, possibly acting as some sort of gatehouses or entranceway to control, who's coming in and out of the castle grounds. And so this actually is quite a large, I'll show you we might get a better image here. You can see this sort of rectangle divided into two portions. And so what we've done is we've positioned our trench over part of both of these portions of that building. So what we're trying to do is to identify the exterior wall of the building, the interior wall, the interior dividing wall, and then try to pick up some of the interior space on either side of that dividing wall. What's interesting as we've been excavating through that is that you can see here, I should think, once it loads up. So this is the view of where we're actually excavating trench one. But this is looking southwest, I think this is looking. So you can see, obviously this area here is our excavated trench where we've taken off the topsoil in there. Up over here on the other side, that is the platform on the opposite side of the routeway where you'd have the remains of the building opposite. Now, where I'm not sure how easy it is for you to see, but where the cursor is, if you can see along this sort of line here, this is, we believe, the internal dividing wall that we could see on the map a minute ago. And this bigger section here, this bigger thing here, is what would have been the southern exterior wall of the structure. So the trench has been located, as I say, to pick up these different walls and to try and determine or pick up some of the internal space within. And the reason for that is, we've got this theory that it might be a platform, that it might be a gatehouse, but we really don't know. We're only working off these sort of drone survey and survey data. And until you actually start digging through, we just don't know what's there. But what you can see in a couple of other pictures, once the topsoil, so that's trench one with the turf removed. Once the topsoil's been removed, you can start to pick out a bit more detail, hopefully. So this is from a different angle again. So the last picture was taken from this corner, looking in that direction. So we're now at the northwest corner of the trench, looking southeast. And so this here is the external southern wall, and this along here, we believe, or what we believed beforehand to be the internal division of this large building. At that point, it looked, we were quite confident with what we were uncovering, quite confident in our theory of what was going on. But the more we began excavating, the more stones that started to appear, and there was a lot more substantial remains, or sort of tumbled remains than we first anticipated. This is with a little bit more excavation done, looking again from the same angle that the first one looked, with just the turf removed. But if you see over here now, you can start to see a lot more stone showing up underneath the topsoil, which is good in one regard, because it shows that with a lot of, I think Historic Scotland were wondering whether the remains of these buildings were sort of clay platforms, weren't really sure what they might have been constructed from, but there's clearly a lot of stonework that's still left from the buildings. And if I'm going to show, the next image you're going to see is taken from around about here, looking down the length of this external wall. And you should be able to see down here, this we believe is actually the wall face. Yeah. So quite nicely packed stones, but everything to the right is probably tumble from that wall. And the more soil we remove, the more of that tumble we reveal. So it's, like I say, it's good in the fact that it shows a lot of building remains. The fact that there's a lot of stone also implies that this was probably a significant building. But the downside of that is we've got to then record and remove a lot more stone than we originally anticipated before we can actually get into the intact deposits, the sort of floor deposits and the like. And let's just see if there's another one. I think this next one is very similar. That just shows a bit more detail. So you can see that, like I say, this is what we believe is the wall face. So everything to the right of that would be inside the building. But what's interesting about the wall as well is you've got this stone facing coming all the way along. The wall actually disappears, or it doesn't disappear, but we've got very little evidence of the wall running through in this corner of the trench. Now, whether that means that it doesn't exist there anymore, whether it may have been an entrance, a doorway, or it could be that this material was later robbed out and used in another building. But the internal part of the wall is actually, there's a lot of, it's not very clear in this picture, but this was a very sort of bright orangey red clay deposit. So we're thinking that, and the external face would be over here somewhere under the turf still. But what we're actually thinking is this is a significant wall that's faced on two sides with stone, and then the sort of composite structure that's then had lots of stone and rubble and clay and everything sort of packed in between the two stone wall faces. But that's got to be, you know, it's a good meter, possibly more wide, if we'd uncovered the other side of it as well. So it's a significant size of wall, which again helps to sort of back up our hypothesis of an administrative sort of gatehouse entranceway up into the castle, rather than just a shed or an enclosure or a sort of small dwelling house. Mm-hmm. What we also have though is what we believed originally to be the internal division wall running north to south all the way across here. You might just start to be able to make out a sort of L shape along here. There doesn't seem to be too much evidence, even though there are some stones there, they just seem to be tumble. There doesn't seem to be too much structural evidence of this wall actually continuing all the way across. And I'm not quite sure how obvious it is on this image, but that wall looks like it continues along here, and you may actually have a rectangle coming all the way around. And what we're currently then thinking, or another possibility, is that we may actually have a later building, a separate building from the large structure that we sort of started looking for. So if we go back to the this image here, this sort of two-roomed rectangular structure may actually be a large rectangular structure that has a later smaller rectangular structure within it, rather than actually being, you know, just one thing. And what is also making us wonder that at the moment is the types of objects, types of artifacts that are coming out. You know, if we're thinking this was an administrative building associated with a castle, and the castle was destroyed in the mid-1600s, all of the objects that we've uncovered so far are 1700s, 1800s, 1900s in date. I would be more inclined to say that they relate more in date to the folly rather than the original medieval castle. And so, which is kind of making me wonder whether there is, like I say, a later building that's then being positioned where this earlier structure was. But that's obviously very early days. We're still, you know, there's still a lot of material to remove before we actually get down to the fully intact wall deposits, and whether we can actually then get through the sort of tumble and rubble through to the floors as well. And then in terms of what else we have in Trench 1, we're starting to get a few of these large flat stones. One here, and this one up here is another one, and one right in the corner of the trench there. On first look, we thought they may have been flagstones, so we thought we'd actually come down to possible floor level actually quite quickly, until we reveal, you know, they didn't join up to any other big flat stones, and there's a lot of rubble and tumble around them. So we're still not quite sure what's going on with these. The other option, or the other possibility, is that the material to the, well, you can't quite make it out in this image. So this is from the opposite corner. This is what we believe to be the tumble from the big wall. We may actually reveal, once we remove this soil, it may not all be tumble. It could be that there's some sort of cobbled surface going on as well. So that's what we need to sort of work through at the moment. And then this just gives you an idea of where that building would be in relation to the castle itself. And you can just make out the sort of size of, you know, the alignment and the size of the big external wall there. So that's trench 1, and I'll show you some of the objects from trench 1 in a second or two. Now the second structure we're looking at is trench 2, and as I say, it's a possible domestic structure that we are looking for over here on the north side of the castle. And the reason we've located the trench where we have is, if you look in this little zoomed out section, you've got a long rectangular building divided in two, and then this small wall on the outside. And so what the working, or the understanding at the moment is that this would be potentially some form of domestic building with a little enclosure attached. Now, when we've been digging there, the few people have been from the village have been walking past and asking why anybody would decide to build a house in that location, because it gets no sun and the ground is frozen for large parts of the winter. So it doesn't, and when you're actually excavating there, it's not the most pleasant place to be positioned, because the castle, you know, you're in the shade of the castle for the majority of the day. So so you know, you kind of have to bring these things into consideration. So whether it was actually a building, a house, or whether it was more functional for animals or some sort of storage. But again, it's early days in there, but what we're uncovering so far in trench 2 is, where's trench 2? So trench 2 here, same size as trench, another 4 meter by 4 meter trench, and this is taken from the south side of the trench. So this here, these stones here, should be the wall of the big long rectangular building, and then there should be the enclosure wall running off in this direction here. So again, what we're doing is locating the trench to identify the remains of each of the different wall components, and then also to try and pick up some of the interior space of the building. What we're finding in this trench, though, and Michelle's been quick to point it out to me regularly, that this is probably where a lot of materials potentially been thrown over the wall over the years, or dumped and slipped down the slope from even possibly dumped from the castle in this area. So once the topsoil had been removed, or the turf and topsoil had been removed, we're focusing on in this area here to get these stones uncovered to try and give a better idea of the walls and how they relate to each other. But there's been over 100 artifacts already just from this small space. And you compare that to trench 1, which is, we've been able to remove more soil up in trench 1 so far. But there's only been 20 or 23 artifacts, I think. So it does appear that this is, somewhere that a lot of stuff's just been, whether it's been tossed over the wall or it's, and again, it's a lot more modern, the artifacts that have been uncovered so far. But they tell a story in themselves, and so it will be quite interesting to see what else comes out in terms of what's been uncovered. This was taken at the end of the day, the last time we were out, so yesterday, and so starting to see possibly this wall of the building coming along here. And then we're not quite sure what's going on yet back up in this top corner. And then the wall up here looks like it's coming out to the left in that direction. So that should be the enclosure wall. And then this is the same, but just from the opposite side of the trench there, just to give you an idea. Now these bits here, these little white bits, that's just little tags that we put in the ground when we find something. Every artifact that we find gets its own number, its own description, and we locate it with the we 3D locate it using either by drawing them in or using surveying equipment that we've got, just so we know exactly where everything came from, and then we can get a nice distribution of the finds from the whole trench, and it can give us an idea of working spaces or what might have been going on in different parts of the building at any given time. We have opened up, I don't have a picture of it here, I'm just checking. We have opened up the third trench, which is, as I say, a smaller one than those two. And if we go back to our image here, the third trench is these first two that we've looked at were both 4 meters by 4 meters. This third one is a 3 meter by 1 meter trench up in to the northeast of the castle. And what it's looking at is, you can possibly just make out a thick black line running around there, some sort of bank. Now, whether that was formed part of the defenses for the castle, some form of rampart. So that's what we're looking for up there. We've started the dig, we've taken off the turf and we've taken off the topsoil, but we've not got any further than that yet in there. So that will be the next task. Well, as well as continuing in trench 1 and 2, the next task is to carry on and try and find out a bit more of whether there is any defensive remains to the northeast of the castle. Now, so that's the trenches. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to give you a quick look at some of the artifacts that have come out so far. So if you just bear with me, I'll turn my video off so it doesn't feel like you're on a roller coaster, and then I'll show you the artifacts in a second.
So an artifact.
So that's everything that's come out so far. And in terms of trench 1, these are all of the objects from trench 1. And I'll pick some of them up and show you in more detail in a second. But the nicest one probably that we've found so far is this one here, find number 17, which is the bowl of a clay pipe. And they would have, I think they would have started to come into use in about the 1600s, but they became very commonplace in the 1700s and 1800s. So much so that it can kind of be regarded as one of the first sort of disposable throwaway items. Very, very easy to and cheap to manufacture. And so what you normally get is a lot of these, which are the pipe stems. You normally get lots of them. Don't often get as many bowls, but that's quite a nice one. And we should be able to date that to give us a better idea of when it would have been discarded. In terms of what else we're getting from trench 1, there's random bits of pottery, but a lot of it, as I say, is glazed. So it's more modern. It's not medieval. And strangely, you seem to be getting quite a few fragments of thin window glass, which is a bit odd. But we haven't come across loads. And that's the other thing, is we don't know what activity was going on during the war. I believe it was used as a radio tower up at the castle. So whether there's some various activity, and then some of these, some of the debris may have related to that. But everything else, so that's trench 1, everything else has come out of trench 2, and it varies from huge bits of bottle glass. So again, a lot of this has probably just been tossed away, of fragments of ceramic, again, glazed ceramics, so some plates and bowls. One thing that's quite nice is an almost complete, nice little glass bottle, so probably some form of medicine or perfume bottle. And we've not had a look yet at the style of it, but we should be able to get an idea of when it might have been made as well. And then some random bits and pieces. Michelle got, I'll see if I can find it, when she found gold. She sent me a message to say she'd found gold. And what it ended up being was this nice little gold. It is actually gold. It's authentic. What it says on the back, it's authentic gold, but it's it must be gold leaf over the top of a button. So there's actually been a couple of buttons that have been found as well that have popped off somebody's jacket at some point. So like I say, a mix of finds that are coming up. Most appear to be not modern, but more modern than, they're not medieval, but we're also still, you know, quite early on in the excavation still, and we've not got through all of the upper deposits yet into the sort of intact lower deposits that might give us a bit more indication of the medieval remains, both up at the building in trench 1 and down at trench 2. But I think the building at trench 2, if it was a house, there's a chance it could have been occupied until the 1700s, the 1800s, and so therefore you would expect to be finding sort of later period artifacts than the medieval anyway. So that's what we've found so far. As I say, it's still quite early days, but we've got some working theories as to what's going on, and it's everything tells its own little story, and we'll hopefully be able to get a bit more detail in the coming days, and to sort of tie things down a bit more precisely in terms of what we think everything is. So what we'll do now, I'll open it to the floor. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to ask anything about what I've been talking about, or if you've got just any questions about something you would like to know about the project in general or archaeology in general, I'm happy to answer as best I can. So there's very few of us here, so if you want to, I don't know, stick your hand up, whoever shouts out the loudest. Yes, Charles.
Ian, thanks very much. Presumably you're only finding relatively modern artifacts because you're still quite shallow.
Yeah, that's.
At what depth, in your experience, would you have to go to find anything of any medieval or similar time period? Well, in your experience,
I mean, it really varies on the site and the conditions on the site. We're with this in trench 2. Now that the topsoil's gone, we're going to be into the sort of wall, the building remains, and so what it depends on is how long that building was occupied for. So if that building was occupied until the 1800s, then you're probably more likely to be finding stuff related to that, unless there's some rubbish pits or midden deposits that might have earlier material in it as well. Up at the other building, if that was abandoned in the 1600s, in theory, as soon as you start to get rid of the rubble remains, you should be starting to find the sort of earlier material. So it really just depends on the sort of context of the site and the nature of the deposits that you're going through.
I see. Thank you. And oh, actually, I've forgotten it. So I'll stand down and, and let someone else answer
Okay.
when I try and remember what I was going to ask.
And I was thinking similarly, Ian, that
Yeah.
a lot of what you've uncovered already, you described as tumble. Can you quite soon move that, film it, and then move it out of the way, and then go down to something that might be below the tumble?
Yes. So in this, with this excavation, with the sort of the approach that we're having to take, because of we're limited to what we can do because of it being a scheduled monument. So we've had to approve a methodology with Historic Environment Scotland. And part of that is that we cannot remove anything that is in situ or in sort of intact. So when we uncover the actual sort of structural remains, so the walls, the in situ walls, we have to leave them. We can't excavate through them. And when we uncover the intact floor deposits, we're only allowed to take a small sample excavation into that. We have to leave them intact. But anything that was originally, part of the wall that's then tumbled over, we can remove that to then reveal what's underneath it. But before we remove it, what we do is we record everything before we remove it. So we do that by photography, like some of the photos that you've been looking at this evening, and then we also do scale drawings of everything. So I'm not quite sure how good this is going to show up in the camera, but this here is a scale drawing of trench 1 after we've taken off the turf and some of the topsoil. So you can see at the top of the drawing is the sort of the larger external wall, and then down in the bottom right corner, I think they might be looking at it, there's this, you can actually start to see the sort of L shape that I was indicating of the other wall. A lot of and then some of the stones are the sort of tumbled remains, the bits in between the walls. And so once we've recorded them by photography and by drawing, we can then remove them to get to the other layers below. So what we haven't done, if we go back to one of these images in trench 1, oh, that's the wrong one. Well, I've just done the same one again, haven't I? So yes, so we drew all of this in this image, and that's what that drawing that I've just shown you was. And then things that are obviously bits of tumble, these stones here, they're just sort of floating within the topsoil, so we can remove them and then start to remove the deposits. And then these ones along here were also obviously tumble that we were able to remove. What we were hoping was that once we'd removed that and we get down, you could then remove that soil and then get into nice intact floor deposits. But what we actually found was that there was a lot more tumble. So we'll now have to clean that all up, draw it again, and then be able to start removing that as well.
Okay, because when you say tumble, these things might have partly fallen down or might have been knocked down. So the deeper you go, the more likely you'll find intact structure.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And so it's knowing, it's working out which is which. And so we only remove things that we're certain are not intact structure, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we say tumble, we just use, it's just a sort of generic term that we use for, I mean, it could be tumble that's occurred naturally as a building's been abandoned, or it could be tumble that's been actually purposeful destruction of the building. Yeah.
And presumably you would be able to tell between the two eventually. I mean, presumably there would be signs of deliberate damage as opposed to just deterioration.
Yeah, normally you can if you should be able to determine, you can actually get quite nice evidence of destruction, I mean, if something had been burnt down, you would find evidence of that. But if something's been purposefully pushed over, you see it. You actually see it in. You can tell that the wall itself has gone in one go. Whereas longer term deterioration, you might just get slumping of material, or the odd bit and piece just sort of more scattered. Obviously, if it's much more destructive, then you could have bits blown all over the place. So the difficulty that we have here is because we're actually working in quite a small trench. We're not going to get the full picture of this building because we're still working in just a sort of limited area for that one itself.
And on Test Pit, which is the northeast of the castle, down the hill a little bit, where you're hoping to find some kind of evidence of possibly a mound or outer defensive structure of some sort. If it's of a particular width, would it be then okay to start imagining that could be actually the circumference of the castle walls itself, the outer wall? So it's very much larger than just on the top of the rock. Is that a possibility, or am I wishful thinking here?
Yeah, it's hard. It will be difficult with that again, just with the size of it. So, it's targeting an area, but we're only going to know that it could be a maximum, or we can only excavate a maximum of 3 meters of it. Right. So if it's wider than that, we're not going to be able to pick up the full width of it. But yeah, it'll be quite interesting to see what is there, and whether if there are sort of defensive features or walls going on in there. It's how were they constructed? Are there stone defenses? Are there earthen defenses? Are there any ditches and things like that? So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see on that one. There were some stones appearing, so it could be a sort of banking material that's earth and stone. But yeah, we unfortunately, again, it's the limitation of how big the trench can be, rather than that's what's limiting us to find out how wide it would be, rather than any other factor, really.
I can't remember how detailed the drone information was, and how much that is guiding you on what you're finding. The drone information is good in terms of identifying outlines of structures. So I don't have the image to hand, but I'll share the image tomorrow or the next day to show why, what's led us to target these areas. The black lines that you see on the plan of the sort of map of the site, that's been done by Historic Scotland working on the drone imagery. But the detail of it shows quite clearly sort of remains that are not visible to the naked eye. You could walk around, you could be walking around and not see any of these things. They don't look that obvious, but just with the detail, the imagery that the drone work was able to do, it's picked out these different height differences that show the outlines of these buildings. One thing that it's not able to do, though, is identify, you're working on these outlines, but it's then partially guesswork in terms of drawing the lines until you, and that's what we're possibly seeing in Trench 1, is that the drone work and the survey for that identified this large rectangular building divided in two, whereas actually there may be more complexity to it than that, which is what we might be starting to reveal with the excavation work. So the drone survey is very detailed, but there is limitations to what it can tell you compared to what excavation can tell you.
What are the plans beyond the dig, beyond this next 2 weeks? in terms of the project?
So the project, there was an extension to the project because of coronavirus. We were able to get an extension until January 2022. But the majority of what will be happening after the dig is going to be now interpretative work. We're going to be putting together all the reporting, putting together some publication material, some information booklets, and getting towards putting out some new interpretation boards on site. There will still be a few workshops in terms of all this interpretation work. We'll be doing some workshops with volunteers, but there won't be any large field work after these 2 weeks as part of this project. But we're hoping at the end, the idea at the end is to have a nice exhibition somewhere as well. So we're going to have, with the artifacts that we've found and the craft material that's being put together as part of the wider project. So again, it'll depend on what restrictions are in place at the time, but we're hoping that we'll be able to put stuff on display in Kelso, I think is what we're thinking at the moment.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, John.
Can you see me? Yes.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Ian, can we just refer to number 2 again, please?
Yeah.
Right. I know you've mentioned drones, but what were the indicator clues for you to dig there in that particular spot?
Yeah, so we'll get that up. So number 2, so the drone picked up detail to indicate that there was structural remains there, and they were interpreted as being this rectangular building. And on the ground, you can actually make out there's a big rectangular platform, nice and flat in that area. You can't really make out the walls. There's a little bit of a lump and a bump around about here, which helps. But generally speaking, we used the platform, so a big rectangular platform, and we just sort of used that as the indication of where the building would have been. And then with the landscape itself, and you can see up here the sort of slopes and the like, and then this other building to the west is a bit more obvious than the one we've put the trench in at. So it's sort of using the drone work and what's visible in the landscape for us to put the trench there. And the reason we chose this one is because it's got not only has it got the building itself, but it's got this little structure off to the south of it as well. So that's why we wanted to have a look at that building. Right.
So presumably in the days before the road that goes through Hume, and the cottages, was there much development in that area?
Well, that's what we're not. It's hard to know for sure because the maps indicate that Hume was probably twice the size as it is now back in the 1700s, and there was a big cluster of buildings around the castle. And so there's maps from the 1740s, I think, that show around the castle. Even though by that time the castle would have been destroyed, the village itself surrounding the castle was still there. And then but by the 1800s, by the mid 1800s, these buildings are no longer occupied, and the village has got its sort of the look of the village in the mid 1800s is similar, not 100% the same, but similar to what it is today. So at some point probably in the late 1700s might have been when these buildings around the castle itself were starting to be abandoned.
Right. Okay. Right.
Does that tie in with any clearances?
I haven't found anything specifically yet, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything. I have heard people say that it was cleared for well, not necessarily formally cleared, but I think people were sort of moved on to improve their habitation. So I think in effect, it is the same thing, you know. So
That's very euphemistic.
yes, yeah.
We're doing it for your own good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's it. I think the lowlands. I think the lowlands are kind of left out of the picture of the clearances quite a lot, when actually all of the agricultural improvements that were going on in the 1700s and the 1800s led to huge farm towns being cleared and people moved on. But it's just not portrayed in the same way that the highland clearances are.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay. Any other questions, or anything else anything you'd like to have a look at of any artifacts? It was just a quick sort of scan through, but can't think. One thing that was quite interesting that came up, I'm not quite sure what it is this. Couldn't tell if it's a marble or if it's been or if it's been shot out of something, but it seems to be some sort of, it's not metal, it might be glazed ceramic, it's not glass either. So but that was down in Trench.
Mud taken off my cannonball, Ian.
Yeah, sorry,
have you taken the mud off my cannonball?
Oh no, I haven't actually, but the cannonball is here, so that's a good reminder, John. Nancy and John popped up the other day because they had found, hang on, I'll just get it.
Wow.
This big hefty cannonball, which is a lot heavier than it looks.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a ball.
Yeah. So, and John, you were saying it was quite shallow in the was it in the topsoil, or you were digging a hedge?
Well, the interesting thing, Ian, is we were digging around the remains of a wall, so it was very near the surface. So my thinking was how it wasn't found before that.
Yeah.
You didn't have to dig very deep to find that. It was just on the surface, more or less.
Yeah.
Whereabouts was this, John?
It was in my back garden.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah, we've been planting some bushes between our garden and next door's, and there was a bit of a wall running up, and then the wall dwindled out to where they put a fence. So we were planting next to the fence, and as I was digging, felt well, I didn't know what it was, obviously. And as Ian says, the weight of it for its size is heavy.
We had I can't remember the chap's name. He lives round the corner from you. With the he's got the minibus in a couple of vans.
Andy.
Yeah. Andy. So he popped up the other day, and he was saying when they were putting in a shed, I think they'd found a cannonball as well.
Right.
So there's clearly been cannonballs have been fired, I presume, have been fired from the castle in that sort of northwesterly direction at some point. So be interesting to know how many more are out there. We haven't found any yet up on site, but who knows?
Are you able to identify in any respect how old it might be?
I'm not, but there are people that will be able to determine, if not how old it is, they'll be able to work out what kind of cannon it was fired from, due to working that out from the size and the weight of the cannonball, and then from that you would be able to give some indication of working out what kind of cannon it was fired from, and that would give you an indication of age as well.
But if it was fired from the castle, then it must have been pre-1650.
Yeah, we think so. Yeah. Because I don't see why it would be down there if it wasn't fired from the castle, because it's and in terms of where batteries may have been positioned, it's perfect up near where Trench 1 is, actually, on that platform area up there. You know, you've got perfect positioning for a battery up there. So yeah,
might have been in 1650.
yeah,
Yeah.
could well be. Yes, yeah.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Good find. Very good find. That.
So that's something that will, at the end of the excavation, everything that's been uncovered, and we'll add the cannonball from John and Nancy's garden into this, will get sent away. They'll either be analysed in-house by us if they're of the material type that we have the expertise to deal with. If not, things like this cannonball and other bits of metal work that we find, they'll get sent off to specialists to be analysed, and then all of that information will get added into the sort of final reporting and publication material for the project. So we'll be able to find something more out about it. So watch this space, John.
Well, I'm busy looking for the cannon at the minute.
Yeah. Good luck with that. Excellent.
Yeah, grand.
Um,
And anybody else have any questions, or?
I was just going to mention that ink. Well, what I thought was an inkwell, but you say it might have been.
Oh, well, it could well be. Could be as well. Yeah. This one here, yeah.
Yeah,
It's amazing to find it in such good nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's lost the top of it. But other than that, it's very good condition. So we'll be able to have a look and potentially get some indication of how old this would be as well. I would, given where it was found and the other types of objects that have come out from there, I would imagine it's probably 19th century, maybe early 20th. But we'll have a look and see what other examples we can find, similar examples we can find. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
A very quick question, just because I'm not really familiar with the rules up in Scotland. How soon is the lockdown going to finish? I mean, are you on a totally different time frame to us down south? I'm just thinking about whether anyone from any schools can be involved before you finish next week. I know that's obviously not very much time, but are they? I mean, is there any movement about how many people can gather outside, for example, imminent, or is it clearly going to miss?
Yeah, I think we're going to miss. Unfortunately, you can now, at the moment, you can now have a total of 4 people. So 2 people each from 2 households can meet outside for a social occasion. Go for a walk or have a coffee, something like that. I think they're now starting non-contact sport is allowed, and which is up to 15 people, I think, or that may have just come in this weekend, and it's that grey area as to where does archaeology fall within all of these things. There's a lot of things where you could kind of argue that it might fall in some brackets, but then there's a lot where you could probably not argue that it could. So
are you saying it's a contact sport?
Yes. I think unfortunately from the school side of things, we wouldn't be able to get anybody out from the schools for this. But we're hopeful. We did have a lot of activities planned with Edenside Primary last summer, and so we're still in contact with them, and we're hopeful that because the project's been extended, there's a lot of activities that, whilst it won't be excavation, there are still activities that we will be able to do with the pupils. So probably not this school year, but I'm hoping that in August or September, we'll actually be able to do some activities that we would have done, last summer with them, and that would still be within the time frame of the project. So not in the near future, but hopefully by late summer we'll be able to do some of the planned activities with the school kids.
Great.
Yeah.
I know they seem to be quite excited about it. So I know there
Yeah.
are some Hume villagers, you know, who are, I mean, school kids, and they're running to report to their form that to their class of progress. So so there is interest there.
No, good. Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ian.
No, it's
great.
quite all right. Thanks everyone for joining. And like I said, what we'll do. I think we'll do another update the same time next week. And so yeah, we'd love to see you all again then. And what we'll do is we'll spread the word throughout the week, and try and get more people involved for next week's one. And we'll hopefully have a lot more to show by then as well. Maybe a cannon and a couple of cannonballs.
Don't hold your breath, anybody.
Well, thanks. Would you circulate the link, the hyperlink to the recording when it's available?
Absolutely, yeah. What I'm going to do is I'll put because we're doing quite a few videos on site as well, and we've been sharing them on through sort of social media on Facebook. But I think what I'll do is I'll put up a page on YouTube that'll have a lot of these videos, and we can put this on as well. And then it gives more access for people who might not be on social media and stuff. So
wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. So once that's all up, I'll make sure and let everyone know.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Ian. Brilliant. Thank you.
No problem. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Good to see you all, and I'll hopefully see you next week.
And
Thanks a
happy
lot.
finding.
Bye.
Yes, thank you. All right. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.